بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. This is the last part of the paper about soul, human soul. That, as you remember, I said this paper was prepared for a conference in Austria, and this is the last part of it. We have already talked about different types of soul and their development and their functions according to Muslim philosophers. Now, there is a discussion about what would be causing happiness of the soul. What would be the ends for human soul and what would be the ultimate end. But as you remember, we said in human beings we have three different types of soul. We have plant or vegetative soul and nafsun nabatiyya. We have animal soul, and we have human rational soul, which are not separate, but there are three aspects of the same reality. But in animals we have only two, and in plants we have only one. So the soul is a unity. So it's one body, one unity, one unit, with all its parts working for one final end. Of course, each part of the soul may have its own lower ends as well. For example, the plant or vegetative soul serves the animal soul and rational soul, but has its own aim, which is to protect life with nourishment, growth, and reproduction. So these are the aims for the vegetative or plant soul, but at the same time it serves the higher levels of soul. Now the question arises, what is the final or ultimate end? Because you cannot say our ultimate end is, nourishment or growth or reproduction, or for example, when it comes to animal soul, moving with will, voluntary movement. No, these are not the ultimate end. Muslim philosophers believe that the ultimate end depends on the ability of soul to separate itself from the demands of the body. Because our soul is very busy with managing a running body, tadbirul badan. This managing and running body keeps our soul very busy, and if the soul can get to the stage that would no longer be affected by the demands coming from body, which keeps it busy, then it would be free to do more important things for the soul. So it depends on its ability to separate itself from the demands of the body and to focus on grasping the eternal aspects of the universe. Grasping the eternal aspects of the universe. Just have some data about this world, particular data is not that important. What is the temperature today? What is the color of this? What is the taste of, ice cream? These are particular information, data. These are not that much important. We need them for managing our life, but what gives development to the soul and flourish the soul is to understand the universals and the eternal aspects of this world. As we saw earlier in this paper, by reaching the state of the acquired intellect, you remember we talked about aql mustafat. We said there are four different of aql, levels of aql, intellect. So we said finally we would reach the point of aql mustafad, the acquired intellect. When we reach that point, we become a knowing world similar to the real world, to the external world. عالما علميا مضاهيا للعالم العيني. You become yourself a world similar to the external world, because everything in the external world is in you. But that is the real world. You are reflection of that through your knowledge. عالما علميا مضاهيا للعالم العيني. Explaining how soul can gain knowledge of all knowable subjects, Allama Tabatabai Rahmatullah Alayh writes, the soul is immaterial, essentially. You remember we said human soul is the substance that in its essence it's immaterial, but in its actions it's material. Yeah? Unlike aql as a type of johar, not human aql. Aql as a type of johar is immaterial in essence and action. But human soul is immaterial in essence, but in action it's material. In the sense that it has madde. Madde here is philosophical madde, means potentiality. Okay. The soul is immaterial in essence, essentially, not in act. Human soul in actions needs the material world, interact with material world, is affected by material world. It has potentiality and goes gradually towards actuality. By virtue of its essential immateriality, the soul intellects its own essence, actually. So the very first thing that the soul can intellect, can understand, is its own essence. But its actual attachment to matter necessitates its gradual transition from potentiality to act, in accordance with different degrees of preparedness. So we cannot finish this journey of becoming fully actual over a night, or so soon. We are full of potentialities. We have actualities, but we are full of potentialities, and gradually these potentialities would be actualized. Unlike uqul mujarrade, those substances which are fully actual, for uqul mujarrade, there is no potentiality, there is no waiting condition. Whatever they could have, they have it. Like angels, according to some Muslim philosophers, they are completely actual. And this is why their position is fixed. There is no change in them. But for human soul, it's a gradual process to move from lots of potentialities towards less potentialities and more actualities. When soul attains to complete immateriality and is no more preoccupied with the regulation of the body's functions, it apprehends all knowables in the manner of not differentiated knowledge. So it understands everything, but not in a tafsili way. It's not in a differentiated way. It understands everything in a holistic way. And this is becoming aql mustafad. So now this is my word. Thus, Allah, that was Allama Tabatabai. This is my. Thus, Muslim philosophers aim at knowing and introducing God and the world of creation through concepts and conceptual arguments which are easier to access, understand, and communicate for most of the people, and therefore become a knowing world similar to the external world. This doesn't mean that they are only interested in theory. So although they give this lots of attention and they spend lots of time on making concepts prepared to talk about God, about creation, but this doesn't mean that for them only theoretical knowledge is important. This does not mean that they are only interested in theory and not in practice. Because when you say becoming a knowing world, maybe some person says, so just to know is enough, and you don't need to change in your character, just to know. So I want to clarify that here, what is the relation between knowing and your own, spiritual side. A very important part of philosophical inquiry for them, for Muslim philosophers, is related to practical disciplines. In Islamic philosophy, like Greek philosophy, like Aristotle, we have theoretical intellect and practical intellect. Al-aql al-nazari, al-aql al-amali. And al-aql al-amali, practical intellect, is responsible for domestic issues of, they call it, tadbir al-manzil, management of the house is one thing that you need to have. If you cannot manage your family and household, you would have a problem. Siyasatul mudun, politics, is another aspect of practical intellect, and morality. So Muslim philosophers don't just talk about metaphysics and, about deep philosophical issues. They are also concerned about ethics and politics and even household management. But still, some people may think this is just knowing what is the best management of the house, knowing what is the best politics, knowing what is the best ethics. I want to say no. Muslim philosophers were not just saying to know and have all these things in your mind is enough. Although by hearing that when we say you become a knowing world, similar to the external world, people may think that it's just knowing. But I want to say it's not just knowing. It's knowing and being a witness for what you know. It's very important. A very important part of philosophical inquiry for them is related to practical disciplines, such as ethics, home management, and politics. It should be noted that for them, for Muslim philosophers, unlike some of their Greek predecessors, ethics is very broad and deals with the subtle issues related to one's relation with God. If you read Aristotle, he's not that much concerned, as far as we see in his Nicomachean, about relation with God. Ethics is more personal and relation with other people. Muslim philosophers, they are very much concerned about the relation with God, but this is not the only thing that is different between them and Greek philosophers. It should be noted that for them, unlike some of their Greek predecessors, ethics is very broad and deals with the subtle issues related to one's relation with God. Thus, for them, a proper philosopher is the one that knows the real world in a general way, in a universal way, through universal concepts, and also knows what to do in the real world in respect to one's relation with oneself, family, society, state, nature, and God. So a philosopher has to know what is the best way for me to relate to these entities. This seems to be the ultimate end of philosophy as a discipline for Greek predecessors of Muslim philosophers. So for them to know these things, although they didn't have necessarily comprehensive, but for them the main thing was how to relate to these things. For them, whether someone acts according to what he learned through philosophy or not has nothing to do with philosophy as such. Okay? Whether you act according to what you know or you don't act is not the business of philosophy. So you can be a very good philosopher if you know these things, but you cannot expect every philosopher to be a pious person. This is Greek philosophy.
But does Aristotle not talk about virtue being the way you live?
Yeah, but for him, knowledge doesn't guarantee virtuous life. Socrates had this idea that knowledge is the only thing that you need, and ignorance is the only problem. But Aristotle had this idea that you may know and still be immoral. This seems to be the ultimate end of philosophy as a discipline for Greek predecessors of Muslim philosophers. For them, whether someone acts according to what he learns through philosophy or not has nothing to do with philosophy as such. So it's not that they didn't have concern about this, but they said this is not within the boundaries of philosophy. One may act immorally and still be a celebrity in philosophy. This is why Aristotle had great faith in knowledge, but did not believe that knowledge can solve all the problems. What about Muslim philosophers? Are they satisfied with just knowing the realities of the world and knowing what a proper course of action in certain circumstances is? So having theoretical knowledge and practical knowledge is enough or not? It seems to me that for Muslim philosophers, even the peripatetic ones, because these are very, rational and very theoretical and farther away from spirituality compared to hikmatul ishraq or transcendent philosophy. They are very rigid in being just following the rational discourse. But even for them, it's not just a matter of knowing. So I said, it seems to me that for Muslim philosophers, even the peripatetic ones, doing philosophy involved what I can formulate as this. This is my formulation. Being a witness over what you know and witnessing what you know in the real world. So you can see what you know in the world and you yourself become a witness of what you know. For example, the first Muslim philosophers, Al-Kendi, they call him the first Muslim philosophers. In his book on first philosophy, he writes this: philosophy is the knowledge of the reality of things within people's possibility. So within people's capacity. It means as much as people have capacity, they should know the reality of things. Because the philosopher's end in theoretical knowledge is to gain truth, and in practical knowledge is to behave in accordance with truth. So for Greek philosophers, practical philosophy was aiming at knowing what is the best response, but for Muslim philosophers, the practical intellect is not just knowing what is the best, is to give the best response. Do you understand the difference? I think here we find a shift. Instead of saying the end in practical knowledge is to know what to behave, he says to behave in accordance with truth. So if you have a bad behavior, you are not a philosopher in this definition. The case of Ibn Sina is more significant because, Ibn Sina compared to Kendi is much more significant. His contribution to philosophy is much more important. In his Uyun al-Hikmah, Ibn Sina has many books. One book is called Uyun al-Hikmah. And Ain here means, fountain, springs of wisdom. He suggested that philosophy or hikmah is the perfection of the human soul through conceptualization of things and judgment of theoretical and practical realities to the measure of human ability. So, here he seems to suggest that philosophy is just about knowing as much as possible. But it's clear that he takes this by itself just a perfection, not all perfection of human soul, compared to those who do not have such knowledge. Then he doesn't stop here. So far it's like Greek philosophers. But later in his life, he distinguished between peripatetic philosophy and what he called to be al-hikmatul mashriqiyya, a kind of oriental philosophy, or a kind of, because mashriq either means orient or means where sun is rising, sharq. Yeah? East is where sun is rising. And for some people, west is where sun is setting. Yeah, in a geographical sense, it's like this. So, when he says al-hikmatul mashriqiyya, it has something to do with east, but something to do with light and rising of sun. So, he says, in al-hikmatul mashriqiyya, you are not only concerned with rationalization and understanding, but also you have to actualize your knowledge. Some people have suggested that actually it was Ibn Sina's reference to this type of philosophy that paved the way for Sheikh Ishraq to introduce Hikmatul Ishraq, which is a different school in Islamic philosophy. You know, we have three major Islamic schools. One is Masha for Avicenna, Bahmaniyar, and Farabi, this type of people. One is Ishraq, Hikmatul Ishraq, Illuminationist school, and one is Transcendent Philosophy, Al-Hikmatul Muta'aliyah for Mullah Sadra, which try to bring good of both together. So some people say Ibn Sina himself paved the way for Sheikh Ishraq. So Al-Hikmatul Mashriqiyya is the beginning of Hikmatul Ishraq for Sheikh Ishraq. So it has been suggested that Ibn Sina's idea of Oriental philosophy set the stage for the Illuminationist philosophy or Hikmatul Ishraq of Suhrawardi. Interestingly, Ibn Sina, in the last three sections of Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, one of the best books of Ibn Sina, which is actually one of the books he wrote towards the end of his life, is called Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat. And this book has been very well received, and many people have made commentaries. Sunni, Shia have made commentaries on this. And the best commentary is, of course, by Khaja Nasruddin Tusi, which is used as a textbook, in the Hawzas. So the last three sections he calls Namat. The sections are called Namat. The last three sections are about Irfan. And it's very interesting that a person like Ibn Sina, who is the pioneer in intellectual discourse, he offers here a masterpiece on Irfan. Very short, very concise, but very profound. So he presents a very nice and indeed a masterpiece on mysticism. A great commentator of Al-Isharat wa Tanbihat, who is Nasiruddin Tusi, in his own monograph, not in the commentary on Isharat, but he has another book called Awsaful Ashraf. Awsaful Ashraf gives a scholarly account of the spiritual journey towards God and different stages that a wayfarer has to go through to be able to meet God. So you see, philosophy and akhlaq and irfan in Islam are very well connected. Therefore, it seems clear that Muslim philosophers saw a close relation between the theoretical aspect of rational soul and the practical aspect of it, between thinking philosophically and leading a virtuous life. Sayyid Hussein Nasr, Sayyid Hussein Nasr, very well-known Muslim, writer, contemporary writer. He has many books. He says this nexus which is connection, which is to be seen in all schools of earlier Islamic philosophy, became even more evident from Suhrawardi onwards. So Suhrawardi, because he introduced the illumination philosophy, he made it even more clearer. The Hakim came to be seen throughout Islamic society not as someone who could only discuss mental concepts in a clever manner, but as one who also lived according to the wisdom which he knew theoretically. So for Muslims, Hakim is who lives according to what he knows. It's not just knowing. The modern Western idea of the philosopher never developed in the Islamic world. That philosopher is the one who knows only. And the ideal stated by the Ikhwan al-Safa, who lived in the 4th Islamic calendar, 10th of Christian calendar, and who were contemporary with Ibn Sina, was to echo ever more loudly over the ages wherever Islamic philosophy was cultivated. What did they say? This is what Ikhwan al-Safa said. The Ikhwan al-Safa is a name of book that maybe is written by different people. The writers, the authors are not well known, but they're Muslim, and some people say maybe they were Ismailis. Ikhwan al-Safa has this, passage. The beginning of philosophy is a very beautiful statement. The beginning of philosophy is the love of the sciences. Its middle is knowledge of the realities of existence to the measure of human ability. So it starts with love for knowledge, then with knowing, and its end is words and deeds in accordance with knowledge. So you love to know, then you know, then you try to live by what you know. These are 3 stages in philosophical development. Okay, the quote is finished. Now I go back to my word. According to Suhrawardi and all later Islamic philosophers, hikmah must be realized within one's whole being and not only mentally. Hakim is not Hakim according to what he knows. Hakim is Hakim according to what he knows and what he does and what he says. Suhrawardi believed that Hakim is the one whose soul can ascend to the world of lights and therefore has achieved the purification of soul as well as the perfection of the theoretical faculty of the soul. Mullah Sadra, the founder of transcendent philosophy, shows sympathy with the conventional definition of philosophy among the peripatetic philosophers in some of his works. So, what I want to say is that in some of his works, he has a definition like peripatetic philosophy, but later you see that he's changing that definition. For example, in the beginning of Al-Aswar al-Aqliyat al-Arba'ah, the most important work of Mullah Sadra, which is used in a very advanced level of studying philosophy in Hawza, is Aswar, which is Al-Aswar al-Aqliyat al-Arba'ah. So this comes in many volumes, very deep. So in the beginning of Aswar, he says that philosophy is the perfecting of the human soul to the extent of human ability through the knowledge of the essential reality of things as they are in themselves, and through judgment concerning their existence established upon demonstration, burhan, not derived from opinion or through imitation. It's not, just taking opinion of people or you imitate without knowing. No, through burhan. Burhan is the best type of argument, in logic. However, it is clear from entire work. So this definition shows he doesn't give that much attention to the conduct. Yeah. So people may just say, "Oh, Mullah Sadra just says knowing. It's a matter of just knowing." But I want to say, no, this is not his idea. However, it is clear from entire work that he is very much concerned with qualities of soul in addition to the knowledge. In the first section of the same book, Al-Aswar, which deals with existence, Mullah Sadra shows his concern about detachment from shahawat, from appetites, and purification of the soul from its material defilements. Indeed, Mullah Sadra, his contemporaries, and his successors have very high esteem for philosophy and see philosophers as the most pious human beings, standing in rank only below to the prophets and imams. They say philosophers, hukama, come just after the prophets and imams. So they are not people just who know. They are very pious people. It should be noted that in Islamic philosophy, the way to know God and the world is not restricted to the conceptual knowledge. Here I have referred to the difference between al-ilm al-husuli and al-ilm al-huduri. Al-ilm al-husuli is knowing things through mental image and concepts. Al-ilm al-huduri, or what we call in English knowledge by presence, is when what you know is present for you without using a concept. The way we know each other is all through mental images. I don't have immediate knowledge of you. Although you see me, but in reality, you first develop an image of me in your mind, and then that image corresponds to the reality, if it is a true image, and then you know. And this is why Muslim philosophers call the image al-ma'lum bil-dhat, and the person or the object outside al-ma'lum bil-arad. So I don't have knowledge of this. Even if I hold it, I drink it, I don't have knowledge of it immediately. There is always something in between me and this object. This is an ilm al-husuli. But the knowledge that we have of ourselves, or the knowledge that we have of our, for example, conditions of the soul, like when you feel happy, when you feel sad, when you have fear, that knowledge that you have can be knowledge by presence. You can develop it into a sentence and then becomes ilm husuli, it becomes conceptual knowledge. For example, you say, I am happy. This is not ilm husuli. But that feeling that you have is ilm huduri. How you put it into words, how you interpret it, then it's another issue. And many times we make mistakes in ilm husuli. And here there are lots of discussions here, and also about mystics and how they interpret their mystical experiences. Many times people may have good mystical experience, but the way they interpret it, the way they articulate it can be wrong. And this is why you have differences in different mystics explanations. But what they experience, if it is genuine mystical experience, is the same. Anyway, we have two types of knowledge. We have ilm husuli or conceptual knowledge and ilm huduri. According to Muslim philosophers, although through conceptual knowledge you can come to a good understanding of God and the world, but it is possible for us also to develop knowledge by presence of God, immediate knowledge of God. Because between cause and effect, when both are immaterial, there is connection. So we are immaterial, our soul, and God is immaterial. So we are present for God and God is present for us. Of course, the way we are present for God is complete. The way God is present for us is incomplete because we are, finite being. Okay, we are 100% known to God. because we are 100% present for God, but God is present for us in a limited way. You understand? So the cause knows everything about its effect, it's ma'lul, but ma'lul knows about its cause only in a limited way. Anyway, we can have this type of knowledge also of God, which if you achieve it and keep it all the time, then you don't need, to go through the concepts or through, other objects. Inshallah, it's the end of it, inshallah. So, I referred here to quoted Allama Tabataba'i's idea about the possibility of human soul having immediate knowledge of God. I believe it. Thus, theoretically, it's possible for all human beings to have an immediate knowledge of God, our final cause. Now the question arises, why there are people who cannot find God? If God is our cause and existentially we are connected and He is present for us, why we are not able to find God in some human beings? To be able to understand this better, we should explore more on the idea of immediate knowledge. What we mean by immediate knowledge here? Immediate knowledge here means knowledge by presence. And that is when the object of knowledge, i.e. what is known by itself, is present to the subject of knowledge, i.e. the knower. And there is no resort to any conceptual image of the object to mediate between the two. In contrast, conceptual knowledge is based on the concepts and images of the knowable, ma'lum. Therefore, what is primarily known in ilm husuli is the image. And then through the image, the knowable is known. Conceptual knowledge constitutes most of our knowledge, but it is subject to mistakes and illusion. Immediate knowledge admits no mistakes because there is no separation or distance between the knower and what is known. Between alim and ma'lum, there is no separation. It is only when we try to interpret it and put it in a conceptual framework that we may make mistake. For example, when I am feeling happy or hopeful or hungry, this feeling is known immediately to my soul and cannot be mistaken. But when I try to interpret it or explain it, then I may make mistakes. I may really have such feeling without knowing what the true explanation for that is. Sometimes we may even not be able to describe our feelings or spiritual experiences by words. In the case of immediate knowledge of God, which is possible for all people, what may actually happen is that there may be some people who are so preoccupied with other things that their attention gets diverted from this immediate knowledge of God to something else. So many people may not have this immediate knowledge of God because they're so busy with other things. In the same way that sometimes you may be very hungry, but you don't feel hunger because you are very busy with other things. Imagine if your child is missing and it's a time of having lunch. You don't think about lunch. You don't feel that hunger because you're so busy with, thinking about what happened to my child. Okay? So it doesn't mean that you don't feel that hunger, but it means that your soul is busy with another thing. So for some people, this is the case with God. They are so busy with other things that their attention is diverted from God to other things. But also, it's possible that some people may have this first-hand experience of God, but may not be able to interpret it. They don't think it is God. They think it is nature. They think it's, something else. It's science. There are different people today, that instead of God, they talk about other things. But they really are talking about God. Ibn Arabi, great Muslim mystic, especially in the field of theoretical irfan, he says nothing other than God has ever been loved. God is what appears from whatever is beloved in the eyes of whoever loves. So every lover, no matter what he or she loves, he or she is loving God. They don't know. If it's a real love, it's only for God, but people mistakenly think it's this money that I love, or this position, or this lady, for example, or this man. But in reality, every love is love for God.
So that love or knowledge of God that we spoke, that they could maybe misinterpret for nature.
Yes.
That isn't Ibn Huzuri?
So they feel that by presence, but when they want to interpret it, they use their own concept, their own ideas, then they make mistake. You know? So as far as experience is concerned, as far as that, fitri understanding of God is concerned, it's the same. But they are not that sophisticated and that developed in their understanding that they can use proper concepts. There is no being except that it loves. So, because Muslim philosophers believe that everything has the quality of love. According to Muslim philosophers, there is no wujud, there is no existence unless it has love. Even immaterial things, they have love. Even Ibn Sina makes this point, because they believe everything has knowledge and everything has love. You think they don't understand, but they understand and they love. Every being has love and has knowledge and has understanding. So he says there is no being except that it loves. Thus the whole universe loves. The whole universe loves and is loved. And all these go back to God. Just as nothing has ever been worshipped other than God. Imam Khomeini mentioned also this in his tafsir of Surah Al-Hamd, that one possibility for tafsir of Iyyaka na'bud is this. Because there are different ways of interpreting Iyyaka na'bud. One is that we only worship you because we are muwahhid. People maybe worship idols, people may worship other things, but we only worship you. We only serve you. But another interpretation is that we human beings only worship you because there is no one else to worship. Even idol worshippers worship you. Even atheists worship you. They don't realize they worship you. This is one meaning of Iyyaka na'bud. So he says no one has ever worshipped anyone other than God. Because everyone intrinsically is serving God and worshipping God. But the problem is that they have wrong imagination of God. So if you ask this idol worshipper, what do you worship? He says, I'm worshiping this statue. But in reality, he wants to worship God. Unconsciously, he's worshiping God, but in a mistaken way. Then he says, in the Quran, in Surah chapter 17, verse 23, God says, your Lord has commanded not to worship except Him. For example, قَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ. This is the case with love. Also, we should not love anyone other than Him. But this is not necessarily happening in conscious way. People may worship other things not knowing consciously that it is God. People may love other things not knowing consciously that they love God. Then he says no one has ever loved anything other than his Creator. However, God the Most High has hidden Himself from them under the love for Zainab, Su'ad, Hind, Layla, or Dunya, or money, or position. So God has hidden himself behind these names. So people think they love this lady, or they love dunya, they love money, they love position. But in reality, it is God who is loved behind these pseudo, realities. Anyway, what is the highest perfection of soul depends on having immediate knowledge of God consciously and constantly. So if you constantly and consciously have this immediate knowledge of God, that is the best thing. Like what we have in Dua Arafi of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. That is the ultimate thing that you can achieve. He says to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Mata ghibta hatta tahtaja ila dalil. We want to reach to this point. He says to Allah, when was the time that you were not present, when you were absent, when you were hidden, so that you needed a sign, a guide to take us towards you? Those who use something to come to know God, they are at a lower level. Yeah? If you say, for example, I look at the world, I look at, these stars, and then I know that there must be God. Okay, this is good, but this is not the maximum. The maximum is that you have that immediate understanding of God that you don't need anything to bring you to God. Okay?
It's not mediated.
Yes, it's not mediated, it's immediate. So, he says that, I say that, I think it is this kind of knowledge that is necessarily linked to the purification of soul. You cannot have conscious and constant, immediate knowledge of God unless through purification of the soul. So that your soul is not affected, is not polluted, and is not always busy with worldly things. To be able to see God through everything, please listen to this sentence. To be able to see God through everything, as Amir al-Mu'minin said, مَا رَأَيْتُ شَيْئًا إِلَّا وَقَدْ رَأَيْتُ اللَّهَ قَبْلَهُ وَبَعْدَهُ وَمَعَهُ. So you can see God through everything, and then seeing everything through God. Okay? If you can see everything through God, not independent from God, is much different from the conceptual knowledge that we say, there is a being which is God, which is necessary being, is wajibul wujud, or is, muharrikul awal, prime mover, and so on and so forth. This is different. So, if Muslim philosophers introduce God and the world of creation through concepts and conceptual arguments, it's just because they are easier to understand, to communicate for most of the people. It's not the only thing that is there. They use these methods because they want to facilitate this understanding for people. But every person needs to experience this in his life, and that very experience cannot be communicated. You have to gain it. Yeah? An Arif cannot communicate Irfan to you. He can talk about it, but then it is not Irfan. Irfan is not something that you speak about it. Yeah? Irfan is a quality. Is it clear? So, this is the end of, ultimate end for human soul. To reach that point that you would not only know the eternal, the essential aspects of the world, but also you live by it and you become a witness of it, and you would develop conscience and constant and immediate knowledge of God. So this is the end of this paper. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.